Ohio has produced 8 presidents of the United States. One delivered the longest inaugural speech in American history, another served only 31 days before dying in office, but one of them would rise from a quiet childhood along the Ohio River to become the general who won the Civil War. This is the story of Ulysses S. Grant. And if you enjoy stories like this about Ohio presidents, make sure to subscribe because this series is exploring the lives of all 8. Grant was born on April 27th, 1822, in a small village of Point Pleasant, Ohio. It was a quiet town along the Ohio River where steamboats passed by carrying goods and travelers westward across the growing country. Grant's father, Jesse Root Grant, owned a tannery. In the early 1800s, tanneries were important business. They turned animal hides into leather shoes, belts, and saddles. But the work was dirty, smelly, and exhausting, and young Grant absolutely hated it. He later joked that he would do almost anything to avoid working in a tannery. Luckily, he had another talent. Grant had an almost natural ability with horses. Even as a young boy, he could handle animals that grown men struggled to control. Neighbors often brought difficult horses to Grant because the quiet young boy had a calm presence that animals seemed to trust. That unusual skill would eventually help shape his future. When Grant was 17 years old, his father arranged for him to attend the United States Military Academy at West Point. Grant wasn't especially excited about becoming a soldier, but the opportunity was too important to ignore. When he arrived at West Point in 1839, something strange happened. A clerical mistake listed him as Ulysses S. Grant instead of his real name, Hiram Ulysses Grant. Rather than go through the trouble of correcting the paperwork, Grant simply accepted the new name, and it stuck for the rest of his life. At West Point, he wasn't the top academic student, but when it came to riding horses, he was one of the best the Academy ever seen. During one riding demonstration, Grant reportedly cleared a jump so high that instructors talked about it for years. In 1843, he graduated and began his career as a young officer in the United States Army. Grant soon found himself fighting in the Mexican American War. During the conflict, he served under experienced commanders like Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott. Grant later wrote that he personally believed the war was wrong, but the experience taught him something incredibly valuable. He watched closely how two different generals planned battles, moved armies, and made decisions under pressure. Those lessons would later help him command far larger armies in the most important conflict in American history. After leaving the Army in 1854, Grant entered civilian life, and it did not go well. He tried farming, he tried business, he even tried to sell real estate, but nothing seemed to work. For years, Grant struggled financially, and at one point, he was forced to move back in with his father. Eventually, he took a job working in the father's leather goods store in Glenda, Illinois. To people around him, he seemed like an ordinary man living an ordinary life. No one suspected he would soon become one of the most famous generals in American history. In 1861, the American Civil War began. The country was divided, and the Union needed experienced officers. Grant returned to military service. At first, few people paid much attention to him, but that changed quickly. His breakthrough came in 1862 at the Battle of Fort Donelson, when Confederate commanders asked Grant what terms of surrender he would accept. He sent back a simple message: No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender. The newspapers loved it. From that moment on, people began saying his initials stood for Unconditional Surrender Grant. President Abraham Lincoln eventually placed Grant in charge of all Union armies. Grant's relentless strategy wore down Confederate forces commanded by Robert E. Lee. Finally, in 1865, Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Court House. The Civil War was over. After the war, Grant was one of the most famous men in America. In 1868, he was elected the 18th President of the United States. Grant became part of the remarkable group known as the Ohio Presidents, including Rutherford B. Hayes, James A. Garfield, Benjamin Harrison, William McKinley, William Howard Taft, Warren G. Harding, and earlier in the series we covered William Henry Harrison, whose presidency famously lasted only 31 days. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to subscribe because we will be exploring all of these Ohio presidents. After leaving office in 1877, Grant faced one of the most difficult challenges of his life. A business partner scammed him out of nearly all of his money. Facing financial ruin, Grant decided to write his memoirs. At the same time, he was battling throat cancer. With help from author Mark Twain, Grant finished the book shortly before his death. It became one of the most successful presidential memoirs ever published. Grant died in 1885, leaving behind a legacy of both a war hero and a president. From a boy who hated working in a tannery in Point Pleasant, Ohio, to the general who helped win the American Civil War, to the 18th President of the United States, the life of Ulysses S. Grant shows how unexpected leaders can shape history. If you enjoy this episode of the Ohio President series, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you missed the episode about William Henry Harrison, you can check that one out next. Thanks for watching.